The night my house burned down, the fire marshal called it an accident. Old wiring, he said softly, as if kindness could soften the darkness of my home and all the memories I held there. I clutched the only thing I'd grabbed on the way out, a shoebox of photographs, and watched 50 years turn to ashes. I believed him. I wanted to believe him. Until a week later, when the insurance adjuster slid a form toward me and said, "Your sons asked that the settlement be put into a joint account for rebuilding. They said you agreed, my sons?" I asked. "I live alone." "They said you were devastated," he said, looking away. They arrived that evening with takeout, speaking in hushed tones. "Mom, sign it now," Daniel insisted. "The prices are going up every day." "For your peace of mind," Mark added. He'd never used that word around me before. "For your peace of mind," as if I were a chair that needed replacing. I studied the form. My hands had taken too long to stop shaking. "Why a joint account?" "So we can handle the contractors for you," Daniel said. "You need to think about your health." "I need to think about my head," I said. "And it's awake." They looked at each other too quickly, too familiarly. Later, as I was emptying the kitchen trash, I caught the sour smell of gasoline on Mark's shoelaces by the door. I might not have noticed, grief always takes its toll, if Mrs. Alvarez hadn't waved across the street the next morning and handed me a clipboard. "My doorbell camera," she said. "Your son's truck pulled up outside your house the night before the fire. Twice on the screen, the taillights glowed like two red eyes at the side of the road." My throat went dry. How could my own sons measure me in ashes and call it love? I didn't cry. Not then. I made tea. I turned on the little recorder I carry in my doctor's purse and set it on the table and called the boys over. "I'm confused," I told them when they arrived. "Explain the money again." They explained too eagerly, too quickly, stumbling over details the fire chief hadn't mentioned. I let them talk. They thought I was alone with a broken home and a soft heart. They forgot who had co-signed the 19% interest mortgage and learned to read contracts by lamplight. They forgot that I remember voices better than faces. They forgot that I still had that calm that scared men who underestimated me. I smiled, asked if they wanted coffee, and they said yes, relieved. 2 weeks before the fire, Daniel came in with a tape measure and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He walked around the perimeter of my living room as if he were going to buy it. "Mom, this place could go for a lot of money," he said, stretching a ribbon over the mantel where we set up our nativity scene every December. "I'm not selling." "It's a lot to keep up," he replied, rolling the tape back with a snap. "You're 72, it's time to let someone else handle the headaches." A month earlier, Mark had offered to change the batteries in my smoke alarms. He went room to room and came down with the little plastic shells cupped like eggs in one hand. "You had the wrong size," he said. "I'll pick up the right ones later." Later never came. I forgot to press him. I still think about that. The night of the fire, I woke to a smell like pennies and hot rubber, a tight coil in the back of my throat. My eyes burned. The hallway swelled with smoke, dark and soft as wool. I grabbed the shoebox of photographs I kept in the hall closet because it was closest, shouted into an empty house out of habit, and walked out barefoot into winter air. I watched the roof bow to flame like a curtain in a theater. It doesn't matter how old you are. When a house goes, the part of you that stacked Tupperware lids and knew the loose tile by the sink goes with it. The fire chief was kind. He patted my shoulder and said what they usually say when a house like mine burns. Old wiring, cold night, no sprinkler system. He wrote "undetermined" in a neat hand that looked practiced. The next week, the insurance adjuster sat at my temporary table in the motel kitchenette and slid the rebuilding documents across the fake oak surface. "Your sons said to make the check to a joint account," he said. "They want to manage the process for you." "My sons?" I said. The words came out flat. He cleared his throat. "They said you'd agreed but were overwhelmed." I stared at the line that named an account I'd never seen. My hands wanted to shake. I told them to wait. They did. That evening they arrived. Daniel carried bags of soup and bread. Mark set the table. They said all the right words and none of the right things. "We can make this easy," Daniel kept saying. "We'll handle contractors, permits, everything. You focus on your health." He always threw my heart murmurs in like punctuation. I asked them why the check had to be joint. Daniel had an answer ready, so we can move quickly. And the smoke alarms? I asked Mark, as if remembering something small. He flinched, then laughed. They were chirping like mad. I took them down. That's all. Mrs. Alvarez's doorbell camera changed everything. 2 red taillights idled in front of my house the night before the fire. The truck shifted forward, paused, and then returned an hour later. I recognized that dent in the bumper the way a mother recognizes her child's laugh. How could my own son stand on my porch with soup and bring ruin in gasoline? I made tea because my mother taught me that in grief, you keep your hands busy. I opened the small recorder I keep in my purse for doctor visits and set it on the table. I pressed the red dot and called my boys. I'm overwhelmed, I said, letting the word they'd used turn in my mouth like a bit of gristle. Explain it again, they explained. Mark described the contractor who could start next week. Daniel mentioned the right way to answer the adjuster's questions. They talk too much. The more a person lies, the more hallway there is for their voice to echo. After they left, I turned the recorder over and listened to their words. We prime the pump now, Daniel said at one point, not noticing the old phrase for what it was. Mark said, we can't get tripped up on timing. Contractors. Timing. A pump. The language inside their comfort. I sat alone in the motel room and counted to 100 like my doctor had taught me for anxiety. Then I called 3 people. The fire investigator's office, my bank, and my friend Ruth. Ruth is 80, and she is the friend God sends to stubborn women so we don't become foolish ones. She'd been a paralegal until she was 75. She listened, said nothing for a long breath, and then she said, do not sign a single thing. Not a letter. Not a receipt, not a thank you card, and bring everything you have to me in the morning. I'll make copies. We started with paper. Ruth took the motel pen and numbered every document the adjuster had given me. She made a grid in her notebook, a tidy table with columns like a ledger, date, person, action, proof. She put a dot where proof was thin and a circle where it was missing. A case is a quilt, she said. We sew. By afternoon, I had the fire report, thin as a calendar page. Undetermined, I had Mrs. Alvarez's video saved to a USB drive. I had a pile of bank statements and all the emails with the insurer. I had the little recorder with my boys' careful voices. I had everything except the part of me that used to walk a hallway in the dark to the bathroom by memory. The investigator's office called me back on Thursday. A woman named Stone answered. Her voice was what you want when your house has burned down. No extra syllables, no sympathy you have to hold. Do you have any reason to think the cause wasn't accidental? She asked. I told her about the camera, the laces, the sudden interest in a joint account. I did not say that a mother knows her sons the way a bird knows a storm. She asked me to email what I had. She said she needed to cross-check gas station purchases and look at the vehicle logs if there were any. It will take time, she added. But we'll look. Time. That old slow knife. In the meantime, my sons began to move fast. Daniel forwarded an email from a contractor named Nichols. The estimate was too big, like a coat 2 sizes larger than the person wearing it. I called Nichols myself. I just want to ask a few questions, I said lightly. You've seen the property? There was a pause. Well, I've seen pictures, he said. Your son sent. My son? I said. Daniel, he said. We've been working together. I'm the owner, I answered. You'll work with me. Another pause, then a tone I recognized from years of making men uncomfortable simply by knowing my own business. Of course, ma'am. I wrote his words in Ruth's table. Quote, based on pictures. Who sent pictures? Ask how many. Ask when. I remembered a map in my head. The gas station off Route 9, where Mark buys his coffee and scratch-offs, the camera mounted over Pump 4, the clerk who calls everyone chief. I went there on Friday morning with Ruth. We bought coffee we didn't want and smiled at the clerk. I had a little fire I said. Sometimes banks ask about spending. Do you mind checking if there were large purchases on my son's cards Tuesday night? They were helping me load some boxes. I handed him a piece of paper with their full names and the last four digits of their cards because mothers keep the details of their children the way sailors read stars. He typed, frowned, typed again. I can't give you copies, he said. But Tuesday night, somebody bought 20 gallons in gas cans, 2 transactions, 10 minutes apart. Ruth slid a card across the counter. Could your manager call this number? She asked. It's the investigator assigned to the incident. She'll ask for the footage. The clerk looked relieved. People like to be told exactly where to place their helpfulness. On the way back to the motel, Ruth said, We are not going to be the ones who call the boys' wives. I wasn't going to call anyone, I said. I'm done calling. I'm going to listen. Good, she said, because listening is a kind of knife. The next day, Stone called back. We pulled the station's video, she said. 2 men filled red cans and put them in the back of a pickup. The plate matches your son Mark's registration. We're verifying the timestamp. We also have your neighbor's doorbell footage and your recorder file. We're opening a formal investigation. How long? I asked. Could be weeks, she said. We have to do it right. I walked the motel hallway like a runner pacing a starting line. Weeks. In that time, my sons would make plans. They would move their pieces. I had to move mine. I went to the bank. The little joint account they'd conjured for rebuilding had my name on nothing. The branch manager, a woman younger than my youngest grandchild, smiled precisely. We would need to see you in person with identification, she said, when I asked how such an account could exist. It doesn't, I said. That's the point. She sobered. I understand. We walked through my accounts. I put a freeze on anything they could touch if they tried to be clever. I set up alerts I could see even if a truck ran me over. Then I went to my safe deposit box and took out the folded envelope my husband and I had labeled in the year 1987, everything important. Inside were deeds, 2 old birth certificates, insurance policies we had paid on for decades, his discharge papers, and the wedding ring my mother-in-law had worn, wrapped in tissue. I counted pieces the way women count rosary beads. I put the ring on a chain around my neck that I didn't take off when I slept. I wrote my sons a note on Sunday. Dinner, Monday, 6 o'clock. There is news about the claim. They came on time. Daniel had a new watch, too shiny for January. Mark carried his hat in both hands, the way a man does when he's ashamed and hasn't decided why. I set 3 cups on the table and poured coffee. I set the little recorder in the middle, like a salt shaker. We're close, Daniel said before he sat. I spoke with Nichols. He can start demolition if we get the first draw. The adjuster asked me for numbers, I said, sliding a printed email toward them, an email Ruth and I had drafted based on the policy's language and the rebuild timeline the insurer would actually follow. I kept my voice small. I don't understand half of it. Daniel skimmed it. It's fine. We'll handle it. I looked at Mark. Did you handle the gas Tuesday night? He flinched again. What gas? The gas for the cans. Silence has a weight. It settled on the table between us like a fourth-place setting. Daniel raised his eyebrows at Mark the way an older brother reminds his younger one of a rule. Mom, he said lightly, neighbors make mistakes. Doorbell cameras show all sorts of... Your boots smelled like gasoline, I said. And the smoke alarms weren't on the ceiling. And you knew exactly which rooms would make the best pictures for your contractor, Mark swallowed. It was cold, he said. Fires burn hotter in the cold, I answered. So do lies. Daniel stood. If you're going to accuse us of something, we don't have to sit here and listen. We could go to the bank, I said. He sat back down. What bank? The one where you asked the adjuster to send my check, I said. The one where, when they ask for identification, you'll produce a piece of paper you call a power of attorney. That's not illegal, Daniel said. If I sign is doing a lot of work in that sentence. Don, I said, the investigator's name is Stone. She says hello. They both went still, like deer on a road. I didn't push, not then. I poured more coffee and let it steam. They left within 15 minutes. Daniel didn't take his email. I let him leave it. Ruth would say, "Sometimes you lay a thread on the floor and wait to see who picks it up." 2 days later, the adjuster called. "A strange thing," he said. "Your sons tried to move the claim forward without you. They sent a video where you supposedly consented. The sound is terrible." "I'd love to hear it," I said. He forwarded the file. On it, my voice was a ghost, thin, flattened, a cut-and-paste job any teenager could do. "I give Daniel and Mark full control," the ghost said. It made my skin crawl. "So?" I took the file to Stone. "It's sloppy," she said, her eyes narrowing with the pleasure of a person who is very good at her job. "But sloppy is still useful." While the investigation moved, life went on in the way life insists. Prescriptions to fill, laundry to do, buildings to navigate with forms and pens. People looked at me with the careful sympathy reserved for women like me, and I learned to wear it like in an old coat. Not quite my size, but serviceable. Ruth called every morning and every evening. "Do not let fatigue make a decision you will pay for later," she told me. "Sleep, eat, walk around the block." I walked around the block of the motel in boots with thick soles that weren't made for walking. I counted the cars. I watched a girl on the second floor practice violin with her window cracked to let out the sharp, sweet sound. I put my hand to my chest and felt the ring under my shirt. Promise, metal and skin. On the second Friday, Stone called again. "We executed a warrant to pull purchase logs from 2 hardware stores," she said. "On the same night as the gas purchases, someone using Mark's card bought 2 new gas cans and a pack of shop rags. We have video. Will you arrest them?" I asked. "When we're ready," she said. "When is ready?" "When they show us the rest of the plan," she answered. "People who do a thing like this rarely do it once. They push. If we grab too early, they plead confusion and walk." I didn't like the sound of walk. I wanted fall. I wanted stop. Ruth tapped the table with her pen. "We coax the rest of the plan into the open," she said, turning toward me. "We hold a mirror, we let them look, and when they are about to adjust their hair, we remove the mirror and put cuffs in its place." "How?" I asked. "The same way they tried to handle you, Mason," she said. "With a meeting, a promise, and a time pressure they think they control." We planned a dinner. I rented the back room of the old Italian restaurant near the courthouse where you can hear the bells at 6. I invited my sons, their wives, my grandchildren, and my neighbor, Mrs. Alvarez. I invited Nichols, the contractor, and I told him to bring his associate for a final walkthrough. The associate would be Stone. I invited the adjuster with the excuse that families like a human face attached to a check. He said yes too quickly, as if he'd been waiting to be asked. The night of the dinner, the tablecloth smelled like starch. The bread arrived hot, the butter soft. People are always hungry on the nights you set your life down like a hand of cards. Daniel and Mark arrived last. Mark wore a tie too tight at his throat. Daniel wore his watch and a shirt with the sleeves rolled once, the way men dress when they want to look like they work without sweating. They took the seats facing the door. A small thing, but I noticed. I stood. "Thank you for coming," I said. I wanted us to hear the plan together." Daniel smiled. "We're all on the same team," he said. He loves teams when he's the captain. Stone sat near the wall with a notebook and a plain black pen. Ruth sat by the door. The adjuster laid a neat folder by his plate. Mrs. Alvarez held her purse close. I passed out copies of the revised estimate from Nichols, revised because he had finally measured the property and removed the fluff. Daniel's smile slipped a fraction. "This seems light," he said. "It's real," Nichols replied, eyes steady on mine. I turned to the adjuster. "And the draw schedule?" He explained. First payment when the demo began, a second when the foundation was cleared, a third on framing, a final when we passed inspection. "Checks will be made to the named insured," he said, nodding at me. "No exceptions." Daniel glanced at Mark. In that glance was a story. We move the money early or we don't get it. I poured water. "Before we go further," I said, "I have a small piece of business." I took a small black device from my purse and set it on the table. It was a portable speaker. I pressed play. My voice filled the room, the clip from the forged consent video. The room listened to the ghost. When it ended, I played the clip from my recorder, the one where Daniel mentioned priming the pump, and Mark said timing. Words are not nails, but they can pin a person to a wall just the same. Daniel stood so fast, his chair squealed. "This is ridiculous," he said loudly. "Mom, you've lost the line between what's real and what's not." "Then you won't mind if we call the detective?" Ruth said mildly. "She's here." Stone stood. She didn't flash a badge like in a movie. She simply said, "I have some questions." It's routine. Mark's jaw clenched. His wife looked at him, then at Daniel, then at me. I met her eyes. I saw pity there, and something like fear. Stone asked the simple questions first. Where were you on the night of the fire? Did you purchase gasoline that week? Do you have any receipts? Daniel was smooth. Mark was not. He shifted in his chair and wiped his palms on his napkin. Annie, his wife, touched his arm. He pulled it away. "You can leave," Stone said evenly, "but I suggest you stay." "These are formal questions. You may want a lawyer present. Why would we want a lawyer?" Daniel said lightly. "We didn't do anything wrong." "Then this will be easy," she answered and sat down. They stayed. One thing about men like my sons, they believe if they remain in the room, they control it. After dinner, while everyone else pretended to eat cake, Stone stepped outside with the adjuster and Nichols. They came back 10 minutes later with the same faces. The cake was too sweet. The bells chimed 6. Mark stood abruptly. "Bathroom," he muttered. I watched him go. I looked at Ruth. She tilted her head, an old bird listening for thunder. The back door of the restaurant creaked open. Ruth rose too, casually, and followed, and when I did the same, no one stopped me. Out behind the restaurant, the alley smelled like yeast and rain. Mark stood with his back to us, talking fast into his phone. "She knows." The lady was there. "No, the adjuster's siding with her. We need the money now. I don't care if it's Monday, do it tonight. We'll say it was a mistake. I didn't recognize the voice on the other end. I didn't need to." Stone's car crept into the mouth of the alley without lights. She got out with the quiet of a person used to not being seen. She didn't look at me. She looked only at Mark. "Who are you calling?" she asked. He snapped his phone shut and shoved it in his pocket. "Private call." "I'm sure," she said. She didn't arrest him then. This was about rope. You don't stop a man with a rope in his hands until you're sure which direction he intends to pull. On Monday morning, my bank called. "We had a gentleman attempt to access your safe deposit box using a power of attorney," the manager said. "We did not let him in. We called the number you put on file if this ever happened." "What gentleman?" I asked, though I knew. "Daniel," she said. "How did he take it?" I asked. "He said he'd be back with a court order." "Put a note on the file," I said. "Anyone who comes regarding my accounts must sit in the waiting area until the police arrive. I won't have to be called first." "Already done," she said. He arrived again on Wednesday. This time I was there with Ruth. I had told Stone. I sat in the chair by the fake ficus and held my purse like a shield. Daniel walked in with a paper in his hand and the look of a man who expects to win because he always has. "This is a court order," he told the manager, loud enough for the room to hear. She took it with 2 fingers and read it. "This is a photocopy," she said. "It's as good as—" She nodded toward the door where 2 officers stepped through as if they'd been waiting outside. Stone followed. "Hello, Daniel," she said. He went very still, then smiled wide enough to show his teeth. "Detective," he said. "Good to see you again." "Is it?" she said. "I'm helping my mother," he said, indicating me with a sweep of the paper like a magician's wand. Stone took the paper from the manager. "This is a false document," she said. She didn't raise her voice. "You are under investigation for arson and insurance fraud. You may want a lawyer now." He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. For the first time since my house burned, I felt the breath go all the way to the bottom of my lungs. Mark was arrested a day later. They caught him at a storage unit on the edge of town. Inside were 2 empty red gas cans, a roll of shop rags, and a box of charred doorknobs. my sons had salvaged to sell as vintage hardware. I told them once I wanted to keep the kitchen knob where my husband's hand landed 1,000 times. They kept it anyway. They meant to sell my husband's touch by the pound. If there is a sound for anger that is too deep to make noise, I made it in that moment. Charges came. People think justice looks like a gavel. It rarely does. It looks like paperwork. It looks like calendars with dates circled that take forever to arrive. It looks like early mornings in courthouse hallways with coffee that tastes like tin. It looks like your adult children at a defense table with ties, their wives ironed. Before the arraignment, Daniel's lawyer called Ruth, who called me. "He wants to make you an offer," she said, grimacing. "What kind?" I asked. "The kind that starts with, 'If you won't testify,' and ends with, 'We'll put things back where they were,'" she said. "Back where they were?" I asked. "He burned the where?" When I saw Daniel in the corridor that day, he looked at me as if I'd turned into an object he couldn't name. "We can fix this," he said. "We can keep it private." "No one needs to know." "The fire department knew," I said. "The neighbors knew. The bank knew. I was the last to know. How quiet did you think the world would be for me?" His mouth tightened. "You're vindictive." "I am awake," I said. At night, alone in the motel, I lay awake and counted the ways a mother can lose a child who still breathes. People talk about stages of grief. They don't talk about the places where grief doubles back and sits on your chest and asks, "Are you sure?" Was I sure? Every morning, the evidence made adjustments to that question until it fit like a suit. I was sure. Then came the thing I didn't plan. Annie knocked on my motel door a week before the hearing. When I opened it, she stepped into the room and stood with her back against the door like someone had pushed her through. "He did it," she said without hello. "They both did." "I know," I said. She shook her head. "No. I mean, Daniel told Mark it would be like replacing shingles. He said, 'She'll be better off with a new place.' She'll see." He looked at me like I should be proud of him for thinking ahead. Mark said the same at first. Then Mark cried when he saw the house. He wanted to back out. Daniel told him it was too late. I let her talk. You don't interrupt a woman bringing you the rest of your story. They wanted the cash to cover the restaurant investment Daniel made with a friend, she said. The friend walked off with the money and left them holding debts. They thought they could rebuild and pay it back before you noticed. "Before I noticed," I repeated, and the repetition made something inside me sit down and stop. "They talked about the alarms," she said, glancing at her hands. "Daniel said as long as you got out, it wasn't a crime. He said it was white collar." Her voice broke on that. I told him, "Fire is not white. Fire is fire." "If you testify," I said, "the prosecutor will ask you to say those words in public." "I will," she said. Her face was the color of paper. "He said I should stand by my family." I told him, "This is me standing by my family." I held her for a moment. She felt light, like glass. The hearing came. Stone sat at one table with the prosecutor, and my son sat at the other. When the judge asked if the parties were ready, the prosecutor rose and said yes, with a voice I wanted to put in my pocket and carry everywhere. They presented the video from the gas station. They presented the hardware store receipts. They presented the neighbor's camera. They played the clip of the forged consent, and then my recorder file. They brought the adjuster to the stand to describe the pressure for a joint account and the attempt at the safe deposit box. They asked Nichols to describe the padded estimate based on photos he did not take. They asked me to stand and point to my sons. I did. My finger did not shake. Then they called Annie. She spoke quietly, hands folded in her lap, and described Daniel's words about shingles and time. When she said, "He told me it was not a crime if no one died," the room made a sound like a drawer sliding shut. The defense tried to make it a case of confusion and a son's concern. They painted me sympathetic and fragile, which they hoped would create a shadow of doubt. They said the boys had intended to do the rebuild honestly once the money was secured. They said the gas was for a snowblower. They said the receipts were coincidence. They said the bank incident was a misunderstanding. The judge listened without expression. Stone sat motionless, the way a person does when the work is almost finished, and the last nail must be placed with care. Afterward, the prosecutor offered a deal: plead to arson in the second degree and insurance fraud, recommend time and restitution, spare the jury the ugly choice of convicting sons on their mother's testimony. I did not decide. The prosecutor did. The law belongs to itself. They took the deal. They confessed in words that I will not set down here because I do not want them to live longer than they have to. When the gavel finally made its small sound, it was almost anticlimactic. That's justice for you. Its loudest moments are often its quietest. They went to jail. They will serve less time than the years it took to build a house and a family, but time is stubborn. It will do what it does to men who think they can bargain with it. People asked me afterward if I felt better. I did not feel better. I felt true. There's a difference. Ruth came over that night with a pie she'd bought instead of baked. We ate it with forks out of the tin. You did what needed doing, she said. So did you, I answered. So did Stone. So did Annie. Even the clerk at the gas station. She nodded. A quilt, she said, patting the table. We sewed. The insurance company rebuilt the house on paper and then cut a check that reflected what it truly cost to build a life back from ash and then stopped shy of impossible. I did not move back in. I sold the plot to a family who wanted a fresh start and moved into a smaller apartment near the river where the light comes golden through the east windows in the morning. The box of photographs now sits on a shelf within reach. I replaced frames where I could. You cannot replace the ones that charred into shapes like curled leaves, so I keep the soot-smudged edges as if they were a border on a map I no longer need to navigate. I changed my will. I set a trust for my grandchildren that requires them to attend a financial literacy class before they can see a cent. I left money to the volunteer fire department and to a legal aid group that helps older people who need someone to sit next to them when a son slides a pen across a table and calls it kindness. For a long time, I did not speak to my sons. Letters came from the facility where they live now. The careful, cold language of men who have learned that apologies are currency. They told me about the programs, about what they were learning, about how they had changed. I threw the first 3 away. I read the 4th. It was Mark's. He wrote about the moment the flames rolled through the kitchen window and turned his stomach to ice. He wrote about the sound he heard that night, a sound he thought was the roof, but later realized was something else, his last good sense leaving his body. He wrote, I will not ask for forgiveness because I do not deserve it, but I will ask for a chance to walk out of here someday and be a man my children can sit next to without fear. I wrote him back. I told him about the river's morning light. I told him forgiveness lives in the same house as memory and is not always on the same floor. I told him I hoped he would do the class the prison offered on fire safety and then teach it to other men. I told him I would be at his parole hearing and that whether I spoke for him would depend on who he was then, not who he had been. Daniel wrote too, but his letter read like a brief. He accounted for factors and pressures and rationalizations. He used words like mitigation. He did not, in 3 pages, use the word wrong. I did not write back. I do not have to. That is a kind of mercy too. In the spring, I planted basil in the shallow dish on my windowsill and learned to cook with 1 pot instead of 3. I bought a new table from a thrift store, a sturdy oak thing with scars like rings on a tree. I sanded it myself, oiled it, put my palms on it, and called it mine. I hosted Sunday dinner there, the first one since the fire, with Ruth and Mrs. Alvarez and Annie and the grandchildren. I set the plates and poured water and watched the way the children's hands settled on the wood. They were careful. Children understand reverence in a way adults forget. After they went home, I washed the dishes and turned off the lights. I stood in the quiet and thought of the night the house went, in the cold air and the smell of wet ash. I thought of the motel and the violin and the slow march of paper through rooms. I thought of the alley behind the Italian restaurant and the way Stone said, ready. I thought of a joint account and a forged paper and the way a voice sounds when it understands that the room does not belong to it anymore. And I thought of the moment at the bank when Daniel opened his mouth and no words came. For me, that was the sound of something breaking and something else beginning. And people like to say revenge is hot. They never talk about the cold part, the stillness that lets you lay every piece on the table and know exactly where it belongs. A month later, I took the bus to the lot where my house had been before the sale closed. The new family was there with ladders and a cooler and laughter that carried farther than I expected. The teenage son waved to me as if I were part of the place. I waved back. I did not go in. I stood on the sidewalk and said a few words under my breath to a man who used to touch the kitchen knob so often the brass went dull. Then I turned around and went back to the stop and waited for the bus and watched pigeons peck at a crust. On the ride home, I stared out the window at the low buildings, the old factory with its broken windows like missing teeth, the river that looked like it was going somewhere quick. The driver played a radio station softly. A woman sang something about coming through. I sat up straight and watched the light move across the water. You don't get back what you lost, you get something else. You get the morning you wake and realize you can breathe without counting. You get to be the person who stood up in a room and told the truth, even when it looked like it would break you. You get to hold on to your name. You get to say to yourself, out loud if you want, that comfort is not a gift a person hands you. It is a room you build with your own hands and then guard with the calm that scares those who underestimated you. Years from now, if anyone asks me how I punished my sons, I will not say prison. It is true, but it is not the answer. I will say I refused to be a woman they could shepherd into silence. I will say I turned on a light and held it steady until every person at that table had to squint. I will say I kept my receipts and my courage side by side in a purse only I carried. I will say I taught my grandchildren what a boundary looks like when it closes, gently and for good. After the hearing, Stone shook my hand. You kept steadier than most, she said. I walked around a lot, I told her, and she smiled, as if she understood exactly what a person means when she says she kept moving so the grief couldn't catch her. It catches you anyway, of course, at odd hours, in the aisle with the paper towels, and the taste of lemon cake, and the creak of a house that is not yours but sounds like one you loved. When it comes now, I let it sit. I make tea, I hold the heat. I listen for the sound that comes after, the small hum of ordinary life reclaiming its corners. Then I get up and carry on. Once, late at night, I woke to the smell of basil. The window was open, the curtain lifting in the breeze like a hand. I lay still, and counted to 100. I thought of red taillights and green seedlings and the color of new wood. I thought of Stone's pen, Ruth's ledger, the clerk's keystrokes, the adjuster's neat folder, Annie's quiet voice. I thought of a quilt. Then I went back to sleep, not like a woman exhausted, but like a woman safe in a house she built from the truth.
My grandma told me this story. I have many more stories. Subscribe so you don't miss the most interesting things.